Esteemed audience, dear professors and students of the University of Ghent, dear Amnesty supporters, dear friends. Beste genodigden, van harte welkom. Gezien het internationale karakter van deze avond zal deze inleiding en de rest van het evenement in het Engels plaatsvinden. My name is Wies de Grave. I am the director of Amnesty International Belgium Flemish section. On behalf of Ghent University, Arts Center 404, and Amnesty International, it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome you to the public lecture at the occasion of awarding the 2023 Amnesty International Chair of Ghent University to Elisabeth Watuti. Yesterday, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, that is the United Nations body for assessing the science related to climate change, published its latest report. The report is a so-called synthesis report because it draws together the key findings of preceding reports and summarizes the extensive work that the IPCC did since 2018. This new, impressive report gives a comprehensive review of global knowledge about the climate. Time and again, the hundreds, if not thousands of pages produced by the IPCC boil down to the same two conclusions. Yesterday's report was, unfortunately, no exception. The first conclusion is that the challenge to keep global warming limited to 1.5 degrees keeps becoming greater due to a continuing increase in greenhouse gas emissions. The second conclusion is that the pace and scale of what has been done so far and current plans are insufficient to tackle the climate crisis. This science-based IPCC assessment makes clear that without transformational changes now in our approach to tackling climate change, the 1.5 degrees warming limit will be missed by a wide margin, with catastrophic consequences for people around the world. The effects of inaction are already clear in the form of more extreme weather events that often hit hardest those who have been the least responsible for the mass consumption of fossil fuels that caused this crisis. More severe droughts, catastrophic flooding, increasingly intense storms and rising sea levels are killing thousands every year and forcing many more people to move from their homes. The IPCC report estimates up to 3.6 billion people worldwide are climate vulnerable. Human rights are intimately linked with climate change. The right to life, the right to health, the right to housing, the rights to water and sanitation are just some of the human rights that are at stake for billions of people. Dear all, the outlook is bleak, but we shouldn't despair. The chair of the IPCC, Hoo-Sung Lee, said, and I quote, "This synthesis report underscores the urgency of taking more ambitious action and shows that, if we act now, we can still secure a livable, sustainable future for all." So, action is what we need. To get to action, we need knowledge and awareness raising. That is what brings the three partners of this event together every year. That is one of the core functions of our partner, the Human Rights Research Network of the University of Ghent. To get to action, we need knowledge and awareness raising, and we need activism. Activism is driving forward Amnesty International as a global human rights movement. When we take collective, long-term action, change is possible. And the contribution of the human rights movement to tackling the climate crisis is driven by our mission to stop human rights violations caused by global warming, to make sure solutions are human rights proof, and to work towards the conditions where everyone, everywhere can enjoy their rights. To get to activism, we need knowledge, awareness raising, activism, and we need activists. People speaking truth to power and brave voices for change. They have shaped positive change in the past and they will do so in the future. That is why we are very honored to welcome Elisabeth Watuti this evening as the laureate of the 2023 Amnesty International Chair of the University of Ghent. Elizabeth Watuti is a passionate environmentalist and young climate leader from Kenya. She is the founder of pioneering youth environmental and climate initiatives and has become one of the best-known faces of today's climate generation. Elizabeth Watuti's activism starts from a strong awareness that how well our environment is doing and how we as humans are doing are intrinsically linked. She is convinced that our care for the earth equals care for ourselves, our families, and our communities. Today, more than ever, as the IPCC report shows, we face existential environmental challenges. No reason to be defeatist, according to Elizabeth Watuti. Our guest of this evening said it very eloquently in her speech at the opening ceremony of the World Leaders Summit at COP26, when she said, and I quote, "I believe in our human capacity to care deeply and act collectively," end of quote. Her lecture today is titled Caring for the Earth, Caring for Ourselves, Planetary Health for a Sustainable Future. Elizabeth Watuti will outline why a change in mindset is needed to address the many existential environmental challenges we face. And she will underscore the importance of a sustainable development model that prioritizes the well-being of people and the planet. Dear attendees, this is already the 14th time this event is taking place. Ghent University, Arts Center 404, and Amnesty International joined forces to raise awareness about human rights in all its dimensions. The Amnesty International Chair is awarded each year to an individual who makes an outstanding contribution to human rights worldwide. Last year, Gloria Wecker was awarded the chair for her work on gender, racism, feminism, and intersectionality. Earlier, the chair was awarded to author Dave Eggers, Sister Jeanne de Vos, Thomas Hammerberg, and Shirin Ebadi, to name only a few. We are truly honored to add Elizabeth Watuti to this list as a young leader who is taking on one of the biggest challenges for the future of human rights. Before we start, let me take you briefly through the program. In a moment, the official awarding of the chair will take place by Professor and Pro-Vice Rector Freddy Mortier of the University of Ghent, followed by the public lecture by our guest of honor, Elizabeth Watuti. After the lecture and at the end of the evening, there will be time for questions and answers with you, the audience. Before we proceed to the award ceremony and lecture, it is of course appropriate to honor our special laureate of the 2023 chair with a laudatio and introduction. Rather than in a speech, we will shape the honoring introduction into a conversation, for which I'm very happy to invite Jutta de Seyn to the podium. Jutta de Seyn studies conflict and development at Ghent University. She works at the Green Office Ghent, has been a climate justice activist since 2019, and is the ideal discussion partner to introduce our laureate, Elizabeth Watuti. On behalf of Ghent University, 404, and Amnesty International, I wish you all a warm welcome once again, and I wish you an inspiring evening. Thank you. Hi, Jutta. Good evening.
Good evening.
Very nice you join me on stage. As I said, you study conflict and development at Ghent University. You work at the Green Office Ghent, and you have been a climate justice activist since 2019. So my first very obvious question would be, who is Elizabeth Watuti, and also, and more importantly, who is she to you?
Well, you introduced her already nicely, I think, and I think she will follow up with her own introduction, so I will just say what she means to me. She's a very strong young woman who is taking on leadership in the climate action scene, and to me that's very inspiring to be a young woman myself. It gives me hope to see that our voices can be heard on that international level that is often being dominated by, let's face it, white old men. So in that sense, in that regard, she's really an inspiration. Also, her work in inviting young people to the scene in her, I have to look up again the name, but the Wangari Maathai Foundation Youth Hub is really inspiring because she really gives voice to young people, even like younger people than ourselves, to voice their struggles with climate crisis, human rights, and everything related to that.
You already mentioned a few of her initiatives, a few aspects of her work. Elisabeth Watuti is well known and praised for the Green Generation Initiative. So what is that initiative and what's its importance?
In that initiative, she planted, I think, over more than 30,000 trees in Kenya together with young people. It's an initiative that focuses on how we need to look differently to nature. And it's an initiative that wants to show to young people, if you take care of nature, in that example, trees, they will take care of you. So it tackles the idea of food sovereignty, in which the nature provides food for you if you take care of nature. Yeah.
Okay, and we'll probably hear more about that later on or in the Q&A afterwards as well. If you look at Elisabeth's work, it is clear that there are some fundamental principles and perspectives that are underpinning everything she does. Amongst them are the climate justice perspective and also this clear vision I already mentioned in the introduction on the relationship between nature and health. What is your understanding of these principles and perspectives and how they drive her work?
The climate justice perspective is a perspective that's being very dominant in the climate movement recently. And it's a perspective that basically states that countries who are emitting the least emissions, like the continent of Africa, for example, are being affected the most by climate change. And since they are the least responsible for the climate crisis, it's a really unfair situation. Then it also states that in these issues, often women, indigenous people, and other groups are being affected more than dominant groups who often have the power, and that makes the climate crisis an unjust crisis.
In the last year's chair for the Amnesty International chair public lecture by Gloria Wecker, we reflected a lot on decolonization in our context. Is there for you also a link between the climate crisis, fighting the climate crisis, Elisabeth Watuti's work, and colonization, decolonization?
Yeah, definitely. I think what I've learned in my education at university is that since the moment we started to colonize the small islands and later on continents like Africa, we decoupled nature from society, and we basically stated that nature is everything nature, and then also indigenous people, women, they are being categorized as nature groups, while society is being possessed or dominated by powerful groups, the West, and often also men. And by decoupling these two, the colonizers said to themselves, we have the rights to exploit nature and commercialize nature. And that was the beginning of the capitalist system, but also the beginning of the climate crisis in which we exploit nature. And I think Elisabeth Watuti is, in her work, redefining that relationship between humans and nature by focusing on that we are equal and we need to take care of each other instead of just taking what we want and take it for granted.
Thank you. I think that clarifies these principles we will hear of course, in her lecture later on. So we do this every year, by awarding the Amnesty International chair, I think the university, of course, wants to honor an individual, but and Elisabeth Watuti clearly makes that outstanding contribution to human rights. But every ceremony is also a very good moment to reflect and challenge ourselves, us as a human rights organization, the university as an institution. And it's always very good to reflect on ourselves, even before hearing from Elisabeth, from what you know from her work. What is for you like a key lesson, maybe the university, where you are a student and you're involved, like maybe a key lesson you should take from Elisabeth's work?
I think in the decisions that need to be made in the university now and in the future, we need to have a broad perspective on the possibilities and not limit ourselves to obvious choices, and therefore choose for the future and the present, which is sustainability, climate change, human rights, and the decisions that need to be made need to take into account perspectives like Elisabeth Watuti is offering us to continue the work of the university.
Does she give you and your colleague students the energy and inspiration to challenge that institution and bring that message to that institution?
Yeah, she definitely gives hope and strength to voice our struggles, and I will take that with me definitely in the rest of my university career and hopefully after that too.
Would you say that, just maybe to finish on that you're clearly very involved you're a climate activist for many years now, and also in your role now as a student and as part of this university. Do you feel like the university is maybe a micro version of the world outside with this damning report again about the lack of action and the lack of taking responsibility?
Definitely. I think the structure of the university is quite like the international structure that's being made, and we see that is not very democratized at all, and we see that the voices of students are hard to be heard in the university. That's the same in the international scene, in which young people are often not that much involved. So I think in tackling the climate crisis, young people need to be involved. I think in tackling issues at the university, young people, students also need to be involved, and they need to be way more involved than they are now.
Okay, and that's a key message or a key inspiration you take from Elisabeth.
Yeah, because she is showing that is possible, but she is also showing that it's not easy, because she is on that scene right now, but a lot of people just don't have the access yet to do that, and she's creating spaces for these people, and I think on a university level that also needs to be done.
Okay, very good, thank you. There's one more question keeping the audience from hearing from Elisabeth, which is about the audience. What would be like your advice for the audience as we are about to listen to the lecture of Elisabeth?
In a climate crisis scene in which the debate in the media, and especially in Flanders, is dominated by often big companies and politicians, I would urge everyone to just listen to a young climate activist leader who has done so much in her life already and who has a lot of wisdom to share, and broaden your perspective to another way of looking at human-nature relationships, and just listen to her because she's very inspiring.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your insights and your comments. Please give Jutta de Seen a round of applause. Applause for your personal and convincing testimony. May I now invite Elisabeth Watuti and Professor Freddy Mortier to the podium for the official award ceremony of the Amnesty International Chair 2023.
Dear Elisabeth Watuti, it is an honor for me, in the name of Ghent University, to honor you for your prominent role as an environmental and climate activist. You are a preeminent source of inspiration for all of us, and especially for our students. And with this Amnesty International Chair of Ghent University, we wish to express our admiration for you and your work, and to show support for everyone committed to the promotion of human rights. So congratulations, and I'm glad that I can offer you this. They call it a medal, although it doesn't look like it. So, congratulations.
Asante sana. Thank you so much. It's truly an honor to receive this award today. It's truly an honor to be here today. And thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I'll just mention a little bit because I feel like they've introduced me fully and I don't need to add so much. My name is Elizabeth Wathuti. I am an environmentalist and a youth climate activist from Kenya. I wear many hats, so I'll just highlight a few of them. I am the founder of the Green Generation Initiative, which I'll mention in my lecture as well. And I also lead the Wangari Maathai Young African Climate Leaders Hub. And I am one of the young people back in my country that has been appointed also by my president to lead the rehabilitation and restoration of the biggest river basin in Kenya, that's the Nairobi River Basin. So I'm deeply grateful and honored to receive the 2023 Amnesty International Chair Award this evening. And I want to start by acknowledging that it may not be obvious to everyone why I, an environmentalist and a climate activist, am receiving a human rights award. For a long time, the environment has been seen as something out there, beyond us, and somehow separate from human affairs. So we have organized ourselves into different tribes, environmental defenders, and human rights defenders, and focused on our separate domains. But we are learning the hard way that this separation is a dangerous illusion. There can be no human health, well-being, or even our survival without the health, well-being, and the survival of the environment on which our lives depend on. By giving me this award, Amnesty International and the University of Ghent are recognizing our common cause, that we are all defenders of a dignified life. The work that I do is deeply rooted in nature. I was born and raised in a wonderful village in Tetu constituency in Nyeri County, which is the most forested region in Kenya, and also home to the late Nobel laureate, Professor Wangari Maathai, who was the first African woman and environmentalist to win the Nobel Peace Prize, indeed a place of abundance. The fastest river in Africa, I call it Gura River, was flowing just close to home. And I remember it was scary going there alone as the water levels were too high and it was flowing at a very fast speed. I have childhood memories of chasing butterflies, gazing at flowers with trees ahead of me, bushes beside me, clean streams, and even running up the hills. And that love is what got me where I am today, fighting for the survival of the forests, wildlife, people, and the entire environment that I grew up with. I've now realized how important it is to link local action on the ground and the work that I'm doing back at home with the children, the youths, and the local communities with international advocacy. I have learned and taught myself how to get people to care about issues such as climate change and take action even when they're not yet at their doorsteps, because I've already seen, felt, and experienced them at my doorstep firsthand. As I prepared for this speech, I decided to reread the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I should clarify that I am not an international lawyer. But I want to share what some of these human rights mean to me and the very direct links to environmental activism as I see. Let's start with Article 3. Everyone has a right to life. Humans need some fundamental things to stay alive. First, we must breathe. And to breathe, we need clean air. The very first thing we do as we emerge from our mother's womb is to take a gasp of air. But not all air is life-sustaining. Millions of school-going children are every day breathing toxic air. Today, as we speak, 9 out of 10 babies around the world will be gasping for air that is actually poisoning them. In fact, the polluted air that passes through their mother's lungs and into the placenta will have already started poisoning them before they are even born. Some of these babies will not make it through childhood. Like 9-year-old Ella Roberta, who died in London on 15th February in 2013 due to an air pollution-induced asthma attack. And the big question is, why? Our air is polluted because of our non-stop burning fossil fuels for electricity, transport, heating, and cooking, burning crop residues, burning forests, all these challenges. Protecting our forests and keeping our rivers and water sources clean, changing our agricultural practices, and switching to clean, renewable energy are usually seen as environmental issues, and yes, they are. But we must understand that they are also health issues. They are also human rights issues. And when environmentalists like me advocate for these things, we are defending the right to life by insisting on our right to breathe clean air. If you're a human rights defender, you too should be calling for nature's protection, forest protection, sustainable agriculture, and renewable energy as if our very lives depend on it, because the truth is, they do. What is the second most important thing we need to stay alive? Many people would probably guess clean drinking water, but it is actually the ability to regulate our core body temperature. While we may survive without water for a few days, hypothermia can kill us within 15 minutes. Hypothermia or heat stroke can kill us within a few hours. The climate crisis has already brought more frequent and intense heat waves that are killing us in tens of thousands every year. Just last summer, 20,000 Europeans died as a result of the heat wave. And as global temperatures continue to rise, so will our exposure to extreme heat. The 2.7 degrees Celsius temperature rise we are headed for may not sound like much, but even a 2 degrees Celsius hotter world means that 1 billion people will be affected by extreme heat stress. And in a 2 degrees Celsius hotter world, parts of the tropics where 40% of the global population lives will regularly reach a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, the human body cannot cool itself by sweating. At that temperature, even healthy people sitting in the shade will die within 6 hours. Both air pollution and rising temperatures share common drivers and solutions. So I repeat, protecting nature and our forests, keeping our rivers and water sources clean, changing our agricultural practices, and switching to clean, renewable energy are usually seen as environmental issues, and yes, they are. But we must understand that they are also health issues. They are also human rights issues. And when environmentalists like me advocate for these things, we are defending the right to life by insisting on our capacity to regulate our own body temperature. If you're a human rights defender, you too should be calling for forest protection, sustainable agriculture, and renewable energy, restoration and rehabilitation of polluted water sources and nature, as if our very lives depend on it, because the truth is, they do. Let's talk about the third and the fourth things that we need in order to stay alive: clean water and nutritious food. As someone whose country is right now in the midst of a prolonged drought, with millions of fellow citizens on the verge of starvation, these issues are very much in my heart. Right now, as I speak, our rivers are running dry, our harvests are failing, our storehouses still stand empty, our animals and people are dying. After the prolonged droughts, extreme floods will begin to be felt in different parts of the country. floods that wash away crops, livestock, homes, and even people. Droughts are not new to Kenya. When I was a baby, droughts came once every 5 or 6 years. It was hard, but our communities had time to recover. We had frequent rains, and I grew up among the trees, as I mentioned, watching the streams and the rivers flow by. Our lives followed the rhythm of the crop seasons, and the main ones I remember were the coffee picking season and the maize harvest season. I spent most of these periods with my grandmother, who had a mini forest on her farm that I still remember. And she loved nature too and understood the power of nature to increase farm produce. We planted more and more trees there every year. Coffee was plentiful. Maize, arrowroots, and cassava were all in plenty too. And I remember playing in my grandmother's granary, which was always full. There was enough to eat, store, and even sell. But as I grew, so did the droughts. By the time I was 5, the rains failed once every 2 or 3 years. Now, the droughts are relentless. In the past 2 years, 5 consecutive rainy seasons have failed, with some regions receiving 75% less rainfall than they usually would. For many of you here today, this level of water and food insecurity is probably unimaginable. Protecting nature and our forests, keeping our rivers and water sources clean, changing our agricultural practices, and switching to clean, renewable energy are seen as environmental issues, and they are. But we must understand that they are also health issues, they are also human rights issues. And when environmentalists like me advocate for these things, we are defending the right to life by protecting our access to food and water. And if you are a human rights defender, you should also call for forest protection, sustainable agriculture, and renewable energy as if our lives depend on it, because they do. I want us to understand deeply that what we do to the web of life, we are doing it to ourselves. And if we want to care for ourselves and each other, we must also start caring for our earth. I'm only 27, but I have been doing what I can. About 6 years ago, I founded the Green Generation Initiative, a tree-growing initiative that enhances also practical climate education and also enhances food security for young Kenyans. In the past few years, we have grown over 40,000 fruit trees to maturity, providing nourishment and the desperately needed nutrition for thousands of children. Every day, we see that when we look after the trees look after us. I remember planting my first tree when I was only 7 years old. At that moment, I felt part of nature, and I knew that I loved nature enough to protect her and give back. During this same time, the late Professor Wangari Maathai, who greatly inspired me and who I mentioned was the first African woman and environmentalist to win the Nobel Peace Prize, was my member of parliament in our home region. She mobilized women to start tree nurseries, to green the area, and even improve their livelihoods in the process. She was my icon, and I admired all that she ever did. Wangari Maathai did what she did at that time because it was the right thing to do. She did it so that my generation could have food and water. Her guiding light was the story of the hummingbird, which reminds us to love instead of hope, and from where I always draw my strength whenever I feel overwhelmed. This story of the hummingbird is about this huge forest that is being consumed by a huge fire. And all the animals in the forest are coming out and are transfixed as they watch the forest burning. And they feel overwhelmed and powerless, except for this little hummingbird that says, I'm going to do something about the fire. So it flies to the nearest stream and takes a drop of water. It puts it on the fire and goes up and down, up and down, up and down as fast as it can. And in the meantime, all the other animals, much bigger animals like the elephant with a big trunk that could bring much more water, are standing there hopeless and helpless. And they're saying to the hummingbird, "What do you think you can do? You're too little. This fire is too big. Your wings are too little, and your beak is so small that you can only bring a small drop of water at a time." But as they continue to discourage the hummingbird, it turns to them without wasting time, and it tells them, "I love this forest, and I am doing the best I can." We are all living the story of the hummingbird right now. Our forests are burning, our house is on fire, and my heart is breaking. Forest landscapes and whole networks of trees worldwide are being destroyed, burned down, and cut down faster than you can even snap your fingers. The waters I drank from when I was little are all drying up. They're no longer flowing at the same fast speed anymore, and the levels have gone down. Our rivers, our lakes, our oceans, our waterways are choking with plastic waste. The harvests are failing. The granaries are running empty, and there is not enough to eat, let alone store or even sell. And with a prolonged drought, and that is actually the worst in 40 years across the Horn of Africa, millions of people are facing climate-related starvation. I am crying for nature's destruction. I am crying for the hungry children, and I am crying because I love them. But I am not standing back like the other animals and feeling hopeless. Just like the hummingbird, I am doing the best I can because I know that our lives depend on nature. So I am recognizing her rights and fighting for her life so that we can all again feel the joy of her abundance once again. I am working with others to protect those places where nature touches us close to home. And my courage comes from love. Love for the people and our planet. And I'm sharing this uplifting feeling with everyone. That is why every day I help children fall in love with nature and learn the joy of cherishing and protecting her through our work at the Green Generation Initiative. And I encourage us all to take the hummingbird story to heart. It makes for a beautiful life. And next time you are asked whether you have hope, please don't sit back and wonder how it will all work out. Just do the best you can with love. There are so many challenges that we have to face collectively on our planet. The only way we can achieve real change is through urgent collaboration and also through compassionate dialogue. And for me, receiving the Ghent University Amnesty International Chair is a great honor and opportunity to strengthen those connections. Through this award, I also want to honor all land and environmental defenders. Environmental defenders are in great danger than ever from being threatened, harassed, criminalized, killed, and even silenced for peacefully protecting the basis of life that all of us depend on. In fact, since the Paris Agreement was signed in December 2015, at least 4 environmental defenders have been killed every week. These are just the deaths that have been registered. When environmentalists like me are advocating for these things, we are defending the right to life by protecting our access to food and water, by protecting our access to a livable world and a safe future. And if you are a human rights defender, you too should be calling for forest protection, sustainable agriculture, and renewable energy as if our very lives depend on it, because they do. This evening, I'm reminded of these great words from Professor Wangari Maathai, that in the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called to shift to a new level of consciousness, to reach the higher moral ground, a time when we have to shed our fear and give hope to each other. That time is now. Today, we have a great opportunity to experience the reality of our connection to everyone and everything around us. I hope and pray that this award reminds us to express deep gratitude for what sustains us. We must learn to reconnect with our emotions and cultivate empathy and respect for nature, people, our surroundings, and this planet we call home, because we are nature. Nature has been helping us for so long, and now it's time for us to help nature. We must never forget that to change everything, we will need everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that very rich, inspiring and moving lecture, I would say. I would have plenty of questions to ask you. So much wisdom was speaking out of your lecture, but I'm very happy to give the floor to the audience, because of course everyone is here to hear your message, but maybe also to ask you some questions, some advice, some insights. So I'm very happy to open the floor immediately for the audience for some reactions, some questions, some things you maybe want to say or ask to Elizabeth. I think there are people in the room with microphones, I guess. There are on both sides. So please raise your hand and you will get a microphone, I guess. I'll let you think a bit and ask one of my own. When I was writing the introduction for today, and yesterday that IPCC report came in, and I immediately went into this like traditional cycle of not reading that report, reading the press release of the report, of course, like these same messages. You could see how they carved, like, again, the message to be alarming, but at the same time to keep it open for action and for hope and so on. And I immediately went with it. I based my introduction on it. How do you look at this, like, I don't know, maybe 10th, 12th, I don't know, IPCC report that is coming out and its conclusions?
I would say we have had so many warnings. In fact, we're living in a time in history where we have access to so much information, to so much science, to so many warnings. And in fact, the IPCC report is just a confirmation of the realities that we've already been seeing on the ground for years now. And it's a confirmation of the stories we've been telling about what is happening with the frontline communities. And I think my feeling as to why things are not changing is because there still exists a disconnect between the realities on the ground and the conversations we're having, even in the rooms where the decisions are being made. And if we draw the connection between the realities and the conversations we're having, then we will move with a much-needed urgency, because what is lacking right now is the urgency. The warnings are there, the information is there, everything is there, but we have to begin telling stories of what is possible and what is important with urgency. And I think for me, that is the missing link, and especially that disconnect. I have been to rooms personally where the biggest decisions are being made about our planet, about our future. And I've been to rooms where even when these decisions are being made, not a single mention of people. When all these issues that we're talking about and everything that we're trying to do, we're doing this so that our people can also have dignified life. We're doing this so that we can have that livable world and habitable planet where people can continue to live and enjoy life as they should. And I think this is one of the main things that we need to keep pushing from our own capacities, that we bring in the realities on the ground, we bring in these stories from frontline communities, because these reports actually are a direct mirror reflection of what we are seeing on the ground every day, of what we have been seeing for years. And the saddest thing is that the people that are least responsible for creating this crisis are the ones that are carrying the biggest burden, are the ones that have been abandoned to their fate to really bear the biggest brunt of it. And for me, that is not justice, that is not climate justice. Climate justice is acknowledging, being honest, being accountable, and actually supporting some of these frontline communities to be able to also build their own resilience. Because the truth of the matter is, as much as these challenges and disasters and climate impacts are already being felt by frontline communities, every day these communities are showing resilience. Every day these communities are building their own resilience. And I think the message being put out there is that we are not doing enough, and we have to really act and respond with the urgency that this deserves, because this has not yet been done.
And who would be in your, of course there are so many actors involved, people, organizations, institutions, companies who could make a difference on a large scale. Who for you is the priority actor to take responsibility right now, and to like take that call of urgency, hear that call from frontline communities?
I like to give that a response with two different perspectives. In terms of taking action, there has been a pattern of people talking about individual responsibility as though it was separate from system change. And I think for me, it's recognizing and acknowledging that every sector and every person has got a huge role to play. But most importantly, we're talking about a crisis that is being escalated by an increase in emissions every day. So we cannot really not talk about cutting of emissions. We cannot really lack to talk about the issues of pollution, that this is where the people that are most responsible for the crisis actually own up, and not just owning up by maybe running initiatives that demonstrate that their action is being taken, when on the other hand, emissions still keep rising. This has to be an all-in for the planet. If we are to deal with the crisis, we have to deal with both cutting the emissions and at the same time making sure that the communities that are already bearing the brunt of this crisis for many years now, that also they receive the justice they require and the justice that they need, because they have been facing these challenges and they have been abandoned to their fate for a long time. Many times we have seen a lot of, especially big industries, big corporations coming forward with solutions, for example, coming forward to support maybe even tree-growing initiatives. But on the other hand, these industries and big corporations are still fueling emissions, are still fueling the crisis. So for me, if we are dealing with the crisis, we have to go all in for the planet. We have to address the root causes of this crisis, but at the same time, we have to support the communities that are on the front line, that are already facing these worst impacts of a crisis that they did not even create.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Is it meanwhile? Yeah. Okay, please go ahead.
Hi. Oh, yeah, no, it's working. Sorry. So you stated that, correctly so, that humans have grown away from nature. Are there any ways in our current environment that we can work on to realize that we as humans are part of the nature we are destroying? Because I think a lot of people just don't realize that because we don't have any nature around us anymore. Is there any way we can improve that?
Yes. The reason I gave my example of what sparked my action, what sparked me to address the challenges around me, is because there's something called a natural call to action, where you just find yourself wanting to address challenges. You just feel overwhelmed by the challenges around you. And what that does to you is that it compels you to step up and take action. And that is missing a lot in the world, because a lot of people, our governments, the leaders around the world seem to be doing things just because it's a duty imposed upon them. But that empathy, that passion to do it, that inner call that drives you to do the right thing is missing a lot. And for me, I think that means that real climate leadership is also missing. Because real climate leadership is when you do something because of the challenges that you're seeing and the fact that you cannot just sit back and watch as our planet gets down to the drain. So for me, what sparked that love and that inner call is because I grew up in these spaces, but also because I noticed the challenges, and I noticed that my natural world that I was seeing as a child was changing over time. Being able to run around a stream that I could not even go close to as a child because the water levels were flowing really fast, to a point where you could just walk there and nothing happens to you because the levels have gone down. It's no longer in the same fast speed. That's really sad to see, and it's something that tells you something is wrong. So there are so many ways that people can get sparked to take action, and I work a lot with a network of young African climate leaders, and I can tell you that not everybody got in the space in the same way I did. Not everybody grew up in a forested region. There are people that grew up in a community where maybe their homes were washed away when the floods happened, and they decided that they're not going to watch as their families or their homes or their communities are washed away by another flood, and they decided to step up and take action. And there are also people that are inspired by the challenges around them, people that are inspired by being able to draw those connections around you. I also work a lot with children in the cities where they may not be able to even grow the trees that we grow with the children back in the bigger areas and in the highlands. But these children are able to connect with their own surrounding even by potting a flower and a plant within their own schools. So it doesn't really have to be sparked from being able to see the forest around you. It also has to be sparked by understanding that there's a world beyond where you are. There's a world outside there that is being affected by the actions that you're taking right now. That there are people beyond the borders that are being affected. And I remember when I started doing international advocacy, I looked at the trees we were growing with the children. And every time I brought the seedlings to the school and I gave each child a tree each to plant and adopt, I really saw how much energy and passion these children had. And then I remembered that beyond this school compound where the kids are trying to green, and beyond their country's borders, there are still big businesses and corporations and governments that are cutting down much bigger ecosystems, much bigger forests. And this, for me, was undermining the very efforts that these little children were doing. And also at the same time, these trees I knew were not going to survive on a warmer planet. As much as we are growing the trees to support the children to have a nutritious meal every day, even with an ongoing drought, then these trees cannot still survive if the planet continues to warm. I think for me, an understanding that it goes beyond the borders, it goes beyond your communities, goes beyond your country, that every action that is being done is affecting somebody somewhere. Every tree that is being cut around the world right now, there's a country that is facing a water crisis that is causing conflicts because people have to share the little remaining drops of water within them. I think for me it is an understanding that as much as you have access to everything you need today, somebody somewhere has no access to food, has no access to water, has no access to what they would need to have. They have no access to education. Why? Because maybe their schools have been submerged after a flood. They have no access to going to school because there are conflicts over the remaining resources, especially water, for example. For me, it's an understanding that every action that is being done from where you are, within your own capacity, by your government, by your leaders, it's affecting people beyond the borders. And I think having that understanding then it's an understanding enough to spark everybody to do what they can within their own capacity, to either transform institutions, transform governments and push governments to do what they must do, and be that voice to that child who hasn't had a meal or water because they're living in a country that is affected by a prolonged drought that they have actually not contributed to. And I think for me, this is what we also call solidarity, where you understand that my actions today will affect somebody somewhere, and that is why I'm stepping up to take action. And it's the same way like that story I told about the hummingbird. You see the fire, but we wait for somebody else to do it. We wait for people to do it, but then in the end, nobody does it. And in the end, the fire continues to be huge. And before we realize, our entire forest is consumed. So being in the climate and environmental space has also taught me that this work is not just for a few individuals. It's not just for a few organizations that are purposely supposed to do this work. It's for everybody else. It's for every sector of the economy has to decarbonize. Every government has to decarbonize. And every individual, every corporation, every person has to be a part of this for us to make the changes that we want to make.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, please go ahead. I can't see you, so please go ahead.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for your speech today. I'm definitely beyond impressed of your work and what you're doing and the presentation today, so thank you so much. I think it's especially important to draw this connection to human rights and especially women's rights. And I'm actually interested in what you think, how it changed on an international level. Like, how does the international, like, how can I say that? Like, well, like on an international level, how did it change over the last years? As it's so important to draw the connection to people and to human rights for action, and I think that's the key, because so many people don't, or like, I think it's easier to see, oh, this is actually connected to our human rights, like environmental issues is our problem as well. So I think, yeah, and I was just thinking what you think, how it changed over the last years.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got the question right, but I think from my perspective, the pattern has always been we treat climate as though the climate was an issue on its side. Then we come to nature and treat nature as if nature is a thing on its own. Then we talk about food on this side as if food is something on its own. Then, of course, there's human rights, there's all these issues of water. But in the end, if we look at the bigger picture, all these issues are so much interconnected. Because if we continue to fuel the nature crisis, if we continue to destroy biodiversity, even though we're planting how many trees, it's not going to matter in the end if we cannot protect and restore the already existing ecosystem, if we cannot protect the already existing water catchment areas and carbon sinks around the world. And if you look at all these issues, they're so much interconnected. They have similar drivers and they have similar solutions. And I think right now, the conversation is much around climate justice. And you cannot talk about climate justice without talking about people, because it is people who are affected by these challenges that we're talking about. It is people who are bearing the brunt of the challenges we're talking about. It is people who are bearing the brunt of this crisis. So right now, the conversations have to shift, and we have to talk about the connection with all these issues, because the more we continue to talk about them in silos, the more we feel as though one issue is not important. For example, we will not meet our climate targets without nature. We are going to need nature to meet our climate targets in the same way. So we cannot really talk about these issues as though they were separate. For me, it is how do we draw this connection? And how do we draw a connection, not just with the words, but with a reality of what we are seeing on the ground, with a reality of the issues that we are experiencing on the ground. And a big challenge that I have noticed as a pattern, and it's a pattern that we also have to really be on the forefront to make sure that it's changing even in our own countries. Many of the places where the decisions are being made in terms of climate issues, there is always a pattern of leaders meeting in international platforms, meeting at the Conference of Parties, meeting in all these big places. But when they meet, what transpires? They come, make pledges, make commitments, but in the end, they end up being pledges made and not met. And as this pattern continues, people in countries like mine still continue to be affected by these challenges. So the urgency has still not been seen as it's supposed to be. And the actions that we're talking about right now have still not been taken seriously. And this is because we have not understood and we have not set ourselves aside to understand that our actions today and our inaction is affecting people in different parts of the world. And I think for me, this is a pattern that has to be broken. This is a pattern that has to change, that even for the COPs, this has to be accountability COPs where the leaders are not just coming to tell us what they will do, which they end up not doing anyway, but we're actually holding them to account because this is about our future. Right now, even with young people, we have seen reports of rising eco-anxiety where about 75% of young people, and this was a study that was done by Avaz, are worried about the future. And this is much more linked to the impacts of climate change. But we cannot accept such a future, and the only way to refuse to accept such a future is to stand to be counted as part of the generation that did everything within their power and their capacity to either make changes within their own institutions or to make their leaders change, because I strongly believe that it is the people that make their leaders change. It is the people that make their leaders do what they must do, because it is the people that have to hold their leaders to account. And I think for me, this is what continues to change that pattern that we are seeing that is still devastating so many people around the world.
Mm-hmm. I think you got it exactly right, the answer to the question. Just maybe as a follow-up, you've been involved in also international advocacy for a few years now. You've been at the COPs and so on. Has there been any moment where you felt there was a kind of a breakthrough in terms of what you're now describing? Did you ever feel like the thing I'm bringing to this table is really heard, is really felt, is like changing something in the room?
Yes, I would say many times when you are speaking in these forums, at that moment it feels as though the leaders are listening. I must say when I spoke at the COP, I felt like they were listening at that moment. But I also know that, you know, opening your heart is not something that you learn through a 6-minute speech. It's not something that you learn by listening to a speech and then the next minute you're okay. It is a practice, and it is something that we have to keep reminding ourselves each and every day. And last year was called the African COP. It was dubbed the African COP. And being dubbed the African COP for me meant so many things that maybe did not mean the same to the world, because many people dubbed it as the African COP because it was happening in Africa. It was happening in Egypt. But for me, it was beyond happening in Africa. It was also about how this forum is going to have climate justice at the center of it, how this forum was going to be different from the rest, how this forum was going to center the present needs of the African continent at the decision-making platform. And I remember before the COP, towards the beginning of last year, I began spending so much time with communities that are affected by the drought. I spent so much time with communities in Wajir County, that is the northeastern part of my country. And I spent time with these communities, listening to their stories, understanding their struggles. And I really wanted to use this as, you know, just as to get people to understand that these issues are happening on the ground right at my doorstep. And one of the push from last year's COP was an aspect of loss and damage finance. This would be finance that would directly support communities like that community in Wajir County. And actually, this is a community whose 80% of their livelihoods come from livestock. But every day, every week I spent there, the roads were full of carcasses of dead livestock, dead wildlife, because the droughts have been there for, more than 5 consecutive rainy seasons have failed. And that means there's no remaining river that's flowing with water. And if there's no water, then people cannot grow food. And if there's no food, people have nothing to eat. And if they have nothing to eat, and that's people and livestock, it means they lose their battle in that way. And I carried with me the stories of these communities in every room that I went into, every forum that I went into, trying to bring that connection. And I actually also did the same in different parts of the world, including Europe, where I was speaking with different parliamentarians, including at the European Parliament, just to get them to understand that this cannot just be an African COP because it's coming to Africa. It has to speak to the present needs of this continent, because for many times, most of these outcomes do not reflect anything that we are seeing on the ground. And they do not reflect the needs that our communities want. Communities that all they need is hope. All they need is urgent action. They do not want policies that are set for 40 years to come or 30 years to come. They won't be alive by then if we don't take action right now. So for us, it's seeing the challenges as they come, seeing the urgency, and then taking the urgent action that's needed. But I think for these forums, the most frustrating part of it is that you push for these issues. You're talking about a child that is about to lose their lives in the next day, and then the policies and the outcomes that you get is that, oh, we're going to cut emissions by 2060. So it doesn't really reflect well with that woman who has to walk 12 miles every day to look for food and water for their family. So we just need to bring and build that connection around the world. So for last year, the breakthrough that happened at COP27 was the Loss and Damage Fund was established, but that's not even really exciting because it was after 30 years of civil society organizing and lobbying for Loss and Damage Fund, 30 years. So it was a good breakthrough, and we acknowledge that as a win and a success. But at the same time, it's really sad that we have to push things for 30 years until people see the urgency. We have to push for 30 years, we have to push for all these years until people acknowledge that Loss and Damage Fund is an urgency for communities on the front line. And those are some of the issues that really are frustrating in the space. And even though the fund was established now, it's even a much bigger struggle moving forward to restructure the financial systems around the world, because the problem is these communities on the front line still do not get access to these finances. So we have to make sure that even as this new fund is being introduced, how are the current financial systems even fit for purpose to support such needs, to support such direct disasters, to support communities on the front line. Countries across the African continent are being driven into deeper debts. And a good example, even with Mozambique, when the cyclone hit, the country had to take a loan to support people out of a cyclone. And this is a country in a continent that has contributed to less than 5% of the entire global greenhouse gas emissions. So that is not climate justice. Climate justice is not driving countries on the front line to much deeper debts to address a crisis that they did not contribute to. And I think, for me, these are some of the issues that are not being acknowledged. Right now, energy is going to be a big conversation at COP28 that is coming up. But one thing that we are not talking about is just energy transition, to ensure that as this is happening, how do we ensure that communities in my country that still have no access to energy get access to energy? Because for us, actually, we're not transitioning from, fossil fuels. My country, for instance, has no single coal power plant. But still, even with 80% of renewable energy, a lot of people have zero access to energy. So we're actually transitioning from no energy to energy. So looking at and at the same time, the reports are saying we have to stop investing further in fossil fuels. But what we are seeing especially in the developed countries, this still continues, even right after the COP. I think there were nations commissioning new coal mines and new power plants. And these are the same things, really, that are a big challenge to how we do things, even as a world, acknowledging that these steps that every country is taking actually continue to devastate more and more communities, because we are hearing from the science, there's no time left. We're seeing the warnings on the ground, and like I mentioned, these reports are just a rubber stamp of the stories we've been telling, just a rubber stamp of what we are witnessing on the ground. And I think for me, it should be a really message that goes out there that the urgency is there, and this is the only time we have to take the much needed action.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, hi, I want to first thank you for your wonderful contribution to the work that you're doing, to your activism. I had a bit of a, not fatalist question, but a bit, because it resonated with me when you were saying that you believe that we the people can convince our leaders to take the right decisions. But I have this worry that you can notice in all the political spaces, surrounding climate change, biodiversity, sustainable agriculture, that there's a corporate capture. A lot of corporates, at least companies, are lobbying for certain solutions which are not serving the people, and they're trying to use these spaces to put solutions forward that are in their own benefits. And I was wondering, how do you deal with greenwashing, especially when you are, dealing with countries whose public economies cannot stand these big corporations? So, from one hand, how do you still mobilize the youth, knowing that much of our future will be decided by their inaction, or at least action? And do you believe that they actually have a role, or do you believe that we actually have to find the solutions outside the system? It's a bit of a broad question, sorry, but in the, in the direction of thinking ahead and forward with concrete solutions, is it within this system, or do we have to motivate the youth to really go and look for other solutions? Thank you.
So thank you. So one quick response on greenwashing. I think for me, for greenwashing, call it out when you spot it. Because we have a tendency where, especially like you give a really good example of big corporations and businesses really hiding behind inaction. I think that's for me what I would say. It's sort of hiding behind inaction. And in a big way, these are the same corporations that now begin to blame people. And they begin to blame, there's a lot of blame on consumption, but you're still producing. And I think for me, it is an aspect of how do we draw a link between these two. And of course, I don't think anybody should get away with greenwashing, because that is not the main reason why these actions are happening. Climate action is not supposed to be done to make anyone look good. It's being done for the survival, for our very own survival. It's being done for our very own planet. And I don't think any solution that is being done to make a company, a government, or industry look good is supposed to be embraced in any way. These are some of the things that we should actually champion and call out, because real climate solutions exist, and real climate solutions are being led out there. I like to give a good example with the communities and the young people I'm working with back in my country, back across Africa, because one thing that I have seen is that young people, and even from the part of the world where I come from, they're not only influencing how other people are responding to the climate crisis, but they are also in their own ways leading solutions on the ground, supporting communities, for example, that are growing drought-resistant crops to make sure that they are able to deal with the drought. For example, initiatives that are supporting communities to harvest rainwater when there are floods to help them prepare for the next drought season, at least for some period of time. And all these are solutions that exist, and I don't think we are reinventing any new wheel. And all these are things that we've been saying for years and years. And even a good look at the climate policies that exist, all these policies exist, but the problem is the implementation is not there. The problem is nobody's stepping up to show real climate leadership, to step up and address the challenges as they are. So I think we should really focus on the real climate solutions. And greenwashing is very evident even in the climate spaces, where you find really big polluting companies sponsoring climate forums. And it is okay to do that, but if you're still continuing in the same way of doing things, that is hypocrisy in the end. And I think for me, it is about how we are addressing the root causes of the problem and how we are also ensuring that these polluting companies also pay for the cost of their pollution. Because, and as even they pay for the cost of their pollution, how do we make sure that we don't continue to see fake climate solutions in the name of institutions or companies or corporations wanting to appear good? I think it is seeing it from the same angle that as we continue to do these things, people are being devastated by these impacts, because in the end, we have to address the root causes of this crisis. Because even though we bring these solutions and do not cut emissions, the losses I'm talking about, the damages I'm talking about will continue to be more, and it means it's even going to be more costly for us to address this problem if we don't address it from the root causes. And I think that is the main thing. And it was actually one of the biggest challenges at COP27, where yes, there was a win on the loss and damage finance to support communities, but it was actually not finance, but it's a fund to establish a fund to support communities. But the outcome on mitigation aspect was really not anything that we had expected. There was no positive sign on cutting emissions from that outcome. And for me, that is not helping even with the loss and damage, because we have to drastically cut emissions for us to really deal with the crisis. What we are doing right now is just treating the symptoms. And even as we treat the symptoms, that doesn't mean that the disease is not going to kill us. So we have to really make sure that we are addressing the root causes of the problem, even as we continue to treat the symptoms.
Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one or two more questions. I see quite some hands. So someone who has the mic, you can start asking your question.
Oh, that was sorry. So do you think younger generations now are growing up with more solidarity and more awareness for the climate change, and why would you think that is?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. I think young people are really showing the leaders what international solidarity looks like. And I have seen this a lot, especially even in the forums at the COP. I've seen this a lot even in marches where young people are demonstrating what international solidarity is, where young people, even from the global north, are giving platforms to young people from the global south like me to really tell their stories. And, and even giving young people from the global south, for example, an opportunity to, for instance, even lead marches in the global north. And this is something that I have seen a demonstration of what international solidarity is, because young people are already showing these things. And if you go to the COPs, this is not something you're going to notice, because in the COP we have leaders that are telling it as it is, and leaders that are actually showing what decisions need to be made. But on the other hand, you find that it's not everybody that actually agrees to it. So even for the loss and damage finance, I remember it was really hard to get loss and damage fund as an agenda in the COP, let alone as an outcome. Why? Because there were countries that were blocking, and they did not want that. They didn't see that as a priority at the COP. But if you look at the way the youth climate movement has continued to demonstrate this leadership, it has been strongly successful because of international solidarity. It's been strongly successful because of giving platforms and listening to the voices of the frontline communities, giving platforms and opportunities to young people that do not have access to that. And also, I have seen so many, and I've actually done a lot of campaigns as well with young people from this part of the world, and they've acknowledged that, yes, they have a privilege, and they have used that privilege to support young people from countries like mine, for example, who are not able to go out there and, for instance, demonstrate or march because it's not safe. And I think seeing this kind of solidarity is the kind of leadership we need to see, even with our leaders as they assemble in these COPs. Because the reason that things are not moving in the COP is because every leader comes to the COP with their own personal agenda for their country. But we forget that we're coming to the COP because we're addressing a challenge that is affecting so many countries at the same time. And I think for us, the youth climate movement, I have never seen a more passionate and a more genuine movement like the youth climate movement right now, because these are the same groups that even at the COPs, we actually come together. It doesn't matter where you're from, and we push for the urgent matters at that moment that are really affecting the communities on the front line. And I think for me, this is a lesson that should really be passed on, especially to our leaders that are making the decisions, our leaders in high positions of power, because that is something that I am yet to see in those platforms with our leaders.
Okay, we are nearing the end of our evening, but we have time for one more question. So, was there someone up there? Yes, please, go ahead.
Hello?
Oh, there's someone else with the mic as well. So we'll take this question, and maybe someone can go with the mic up there, and we take the second one as well, and then you can...
Okay. Yeah. So first of all, thank you for your lecture and for setting an example. I think as many young people, I also feel the urgency and want to act within my own capacity. So my question for you, it might be a bit personal, but it's actually asking some practical tips, and I will specify what I mean by that. In the introduction, it was said that to make change, awareness raising is needed and activism. And I think many people who advocate for human rights feel that there's a lot of moments when you're bumping into walls of ignorance and you're facing deeply rooted patterns based on that ignorance. And it can trigger feelings of despair and loneliness. It can be overwhelming. So my question for you as the embodiment of that hummingbird is, I wonder what energizes you. How do you deal with those feelings if they occur, and what do you do to recharge your batteries to the next day pick up the fight again to fight for climate justice?
That's a lovely question. So I would say since my childhood, I have been learning and teaching myself how to turn my frustrations and my anger into a hunger to do something about what is making me angry. And I think for me, it is two things. There is a reactive approach and a proactive approach. Reactive is, for instance, I go into a forest maybe in my community and I find the trees are all cut down. At that moment, I'll be frustrated, I'll be very angry. But action is what I do after I'm frustrated. What is the next step? How do I turn my frustrations to give me a hunger to want to do something. Because one thing is, if you're overwhelmed by what is surrounding you, the next thing that you do to deal with that is to actually do something about it, regardless of how little you feel your efforts are. Because for me, I do not think that for an individual, for example, that there is any effort that is too little. Because I strongly believe that those acts multiplied by millions of us are what end up making the huge difference. And when I started, in fact, before I started doing like dozens of trees, I remember I was compelled to do something because of the challenges I was witnessing. And I remember the first time that I started my organization, I just walked into a school with about 20 seedlings. And this is because I wanted to understand and speak to the children and also understand what their perspectives were, and to get them to understand that they can also be a part of the solution. And of course, this was in a region that was greatly affected by the drought situation. But for me, it was about that first step that I took, because I think many times as young people, we wait until we have everything that we need, maybe wait until you have an organization, or you wait until you have resources, you wait until you have something to do. But I think for me, that very first thing that you do after you see a challenge, that is the very beginning step of you taking action. And when I started, like I mentioned, I didn't know that I would get to a point where now, through the organization, I'm also impacting thousands of other children. But if I had not started at the very first time, then I would not have made a single contribution. But I think for me, it is taking that first step. And of course, even raising awareness, reaching out to people. Because right now, if those of us that have this message right now, for instance, that are listening to me in this room today, if those of us that are here then are not really compelled to do something, for example, or do not pick one thing today that you're going to do, then anybody else who's not here is at peace. So we have to remember that those of us who feel strongly and who understand are the ones that get disturbed and are caused to take action. And the burden is on us. Because those who don't know or who didn't hear this message, they're at peace. So it is us that pass that message to people. It is us that are compelled to do something and pass that message to our leaders. It is us here in this room that pick one thing that you choose to do today, and especially to the young people, one thing that you're going to make a change in. And I've just shared with you what my little thing is that I picked to do, and I continued to carry on with it until I drew a connection with what is happening around the world. Right now, we have access to so much information. We have access to technology. We have access to every resource that we need around the world. Telling stories of communities on the front line. Many times you find stories that are being told, but the way the stories are being told, it's not really being amplified enough. We get to places and rooms where people are talking about maybe a drought situation, and these are like international forums. But the communities that are being talked about are still not present in those rooms. So it is us to tell these stories. It is us to amplify these stories. It is us to make sure that these stories are being told, and the right stories. And I've mentioned about the challenges, but I've also mentioned that there are so many initiatives on the ground that are happening, being done by young people. And I think these are also some of the stories that need to be amplified. Because many times the solutions that exist are already being done by someone somewhere in a community. They're already being pushed and driven by a youth-led group somewhere across the continent, for example. And it is us to make sure that these initiatives also get the support they need, the networks they need, and the amplification they need, so that that work can also be, can also continue to have a maximized impact. So there's so much that we can do, and that includes both at a personal level and also at how you influence the leadership and the government at large, because I strongly believe every person can take up that step And just by stepping up and doing it is what makes a change. And I think I've mentioned what keeps me going, and how I do that is because for me, that is what, the fuel that keeps me going is being able to even see these challenges, you know, even like see what is happening more and then being compelled to take more action on it. But also, at the same time, the really main thing that gives me hope is the work that I do with the children back at home. Because every day seeing these children, you know, even harvesting fruits, for example, and seeing them really happy that they've seen beetles are back in the school, or they can see butterflies, they never used to see them, the birds are back in the school because we've created a green space that never existed in the school. And a good reason why, for me, this is really special, in my country, it is not, you know, like the green spaces may not be as much accessible to everyone. And of course, you have to pay an entrance fee, whether you're a child or anyone has to pay an entrance fee. And I've seen in different parts of the world, especially in the global north that I've visited, I have seen many times it's different, that it's just freely accessible. So for me, creating green spaces where the kids don't have to leave their school compounds to go and see a forest, or they don't have to leave their school compound to go and experience the beauty of listening to the bird songs, for me it's a really special thing that keeps me going every day. And it keeps me going and keeps me having that energy to create more similar spaces for many kids across different parts of my country. And I think for me, being able to know that what you're doing may not be directly impacting you, but it's impacting somebody somewhere. And also, so many people, young people around the world, you know, they reach out to me and they say, I listened to you, I saw your work, and today I have started this initiative. And that to me is what, you know, that to me is what this is all about. That's the main purpose. It's about compelling people to do something. It's about getting more people to do much more. Because when we are together, I normally say that you can make a difference as one, but collectively we are going to be a force. And I think for me that is the main thing that I have learned in all the work that I'm doing, that being able to draw so many people to take up action, because it's one thing to talk to people, but it's another thing to compel people to do something after they've listened to what you've done. And I think for me that is the most difficult part, and it's what really is like the main reason I also do the work that I do, to get people to take action, to get people to see the urgency, not just see the urgency, but move an extra step to do something within their own capacity.
Thank you. Just checking on housekeeping, we are running a bit out of time. Are you still up for 2 more questions, or? Okay, I think there's one question upstairs, and I think there was someone, yes, in front. If we can maybe just take the 2 questions and then let you give one final answer. And thank you so much for sharing your time and energy with us. So maybe if we can have a mic here, and the question from upstairs.
Is it working? Okay.
Yeah.
I heard a lot about, I would say, individual initiative, which is great. And if you want to have change to happen, you need to be part of change. So I wonder, tomorrow, how many percentage of us is going to leave out to meet for his dinner? It's just an open question, without wanting to hurt anyone, because we have the choice, I would say. That's the first thing. A second thing I would like to ask you, I was missing a little bit, it's not a criticism, about the political system and the democracies we're living in, because this is very slow. We know when you have a new government installed, it's there, for example, for 4 years. The first year it's installing, second and third year it's starting to operate fully, and then the 4th year, well, the next elections are there, and they're focused on this, so it's about power. So how are you going to speed up that process in an urgent matter like that?
Okay.
And the second thing linked to that, you think if you would have a kind of a technocratic system involved, this would speed up things.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So 2 comments, questions there, and please go ahead, and then we can let Elizabeth give her final contribution.
Welcome to Ghent. Karibu. I have a few questions in terms of what you have said and what you think. What I think is going to be a little bit of a problem, because you talked about renewable energy as a way of combating climate change, but renewable energy needs some components which are not renewable. For example, now we have seen what is happening in Congo, what is happening in Peru, and what is happening now, in Peru for lithium, and in Congo for the minerals that are needed for cobalt, for example, for the batteries. The environmental damage that is happening there is irreversible. It's incredible. And yet, we talk of clean energy in Europe, that it is okay here, and forget where everything else is coming. How far is this going to take us? That's number one. Secondly, I'm talking about the political will. At the moment, you have a lot of areas, for example, in Goma, Eastern Congo, where there's a lot of problems. I've been there. I've seen the damage that is causing, the environment is causing. I've seen the damage that is happening again now, that is happening in Ukraine, in the area around the Dnipro region, where you have more than 30% of our food production for grains is coming from there. Serious damage. And I talk of areas, for example, what is happening in Burma, Myanmar. If you see the people who moved from Myanmar, the Rohingyas who moved to Cox's Bazar to go into Bangladesh, the environmental damage that they've caused there is terrible. So how are we going to solve this? The economic aspect, for example, also you are from Kenya, look at Kibera. I'm from South Africa, look at Kailisha. Nigeria, look at Makoko. How are you going to solve these problems? What is the impact on the climate?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, that was opening a lot of issues now in these comments. I don't know if you're comfortable with taking some of I don't think we have to take all of them, but maybe 1 or 2 you're comfortable to answer, and then we'll close.
Yeah, maybe I could just summarize. And the last question actually opened up something I'm not sure I mentioned it, but it's also an aspect of how do you get people to care. And I use examples a lot of the work that I'm doing back at home. It is not every time that you ask somebody to, for example, do something for the environment and they'll do it. It has to make sense to them. It has to make sense to them also, especially people that are currently, they need to support their livelihoods at the same time. And so one of the things, and it's part of the things that we're doing and part of the things that I've also seen a lot of youth initiatives taking up, is how do we make sure that at the same time, while we are conserving for nature, that we're also doing it for the people, that people that are leading these initiatives also are able to get an income out of it. They're able to earn a living out of the work that they're doing. And I'll give a good example with some of, for example, when we're doing the fruit trees, we, in many times, will pick fruit trees, and there's like indigenous apples in my country that actually take about 9 months to produce fruit. So this is really one of the main things that we've seen would help us through the aspect of food insecurity. But also, while these apples produce nutritious food, it also means that as they continue to be grown, and of course they support in restoring the ecosystem at the same time, but also the surplus is what goes to the market and the communities are able to benefit from it. The trees we are grown in nurseries, that's in tree nurseries that are being done by communities. And what it means that when the seedlings are bought from the communities, then they can continue in participating in the restoration efforts. So we have to look at both perspectives. How are we supporting communities and communities also that are participating in conservation? It has to be directly linked to how it improves their livelihoods and their well-being. And that is why we cannot separate people from our planet. So we have to make sure that these communities are being supported. And at the same time, with even as we create room for example, if we're putting up any solutions that we call green, even in terms of energy, it cannot be at the expense of communities. It cannot be at the expense of driving communities out of their ancestral homes because we are putting up energy plants. So that cannot be the case. It has to be people and our planet. They have to be on the front line in every decision that we're making today. And I think, and lastly, of course, we know that the era of fossil fuels is not, it's gone, and we have to really make sure that this is a time that we're ramping up investments in clean and renewable energy. And when I talk about energy, it's so many things. It's also about cooking energy. And I have been in places where communities are already changing energy for good. They have realized that if, for example, they've realized that the challenges they are facing, for example, with indoor air pollution, and I've worked with communities that are right now finding their own solutions, for example, even having biogas as their only method of clean cooking just to stop indoor air pollution because their children are getting sick. And this is especially happening a lot in informal settlement areas. And for me, the reason I like to give examples with communities is because these communities are not even the ones whose responsibility to do these things are on. But because they've seen the challenges, they're not waiting for anybody to come and help them. They've already started demonstrating what real climate solutions look like. And I think that is a message that goes to everybody else, to people in high positions of power, to do more, to support these communities and to do much more, because if communities are doing it, then the big question is what is stopping our governments? What is stopping, for example, rich countries? What is stopping people that are not taking action from taking action if communities on the front line are already demonstrating what action looks like? So my challenge for everyone here today, I've said so many things, and just my challenge is, and this is going to be a question that I leave with everyone, is what will you do? Don't answer me, just think about it. And I think for me, for me, just speaking what is it that you will do from your own capacity is where the real action starts from. Because if you do not pick what you will do, then you're still part of the group that is, like delaying action. But I strongly believe every person has a responsibility and every person can make the change happen, regardless of where you are or even in whichever position that you're in. Many times when young people are stepping up, they're being told to wait until they are in high positions of power to make changes. But really, I don't think young people are the leaders of tomorrow. They're actually leading today. And anything that we can do is to lead today from our own capacity and perspective. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your wisdom, your inspiration, and for opening our hearts tonight. Thank you, everyone, for showing up tonight and listening to Elizabeth Watuti. I have one small announcement. When you go out, you will receive a gift from us. So please take it home and read it carefully at home and don't let it somewhere in 404 here. So please take it home and read it carefully. Those invited to the reception are welcome in the reception room, and I would like to thank everyone and wish you a very good evening. Thank you.
Somebody calls you, somebody says, swim with the current and float away down by the river every day. Oh my God, I see how everything is torn.